the Cambridge campus of Anoka-Ramsey Community College. It's a new video and it's pretty awesome, just showcasing what we do, so we thought it'd be a good venue to show it. Welcome everyone to the Minnesota Writers Series. This is our 29th Minnesota Writers Series, which means we've been doing it for a long time. It also means that next year is our 30th, and plans are in the works to do it up big. So about a year from now, if you are around, please look for information about that. We hope to make a whole day long event out of it. Just some quick thank yous to, my name is Bill Breen, and I teach English at the campus and coordinate this reading series. And I, along with some other people, helped put this together. We also had a dinner right next door before this event. And there are a lot of people involved in that, in particular Mackenzie Krasmarzik, who teaches communication studies and is the GSA faculty advisor, and also Shannon Kirkheide, who is our academic and community outreach dean. And then of course facilities set things up, and we have marketing people who get the word out, and so a lot of people help make this possible, so I wanted to thank all of them. Before I introduce Ryan, we do have some refreshments right outside, and there will be copies of Ryan's book for sale, and you will sign. You will talk to people.
I will talk to people.
You will be friendly.
I will.
I believe you. I believe you. Okay. Ryan Berg, his debut book, No House to Call My Home, Love, Family, and Other Transgressions, won the 2016 Minnesota Book Award for General Nonfiction, the 2016 NCCD Media for a Just Society Award, and was listed as a top 10 LGBTQ book of 2016 by the American Library Association. He's received the New York Foundation of the Arts Fellowship in Nonfiction Literature, and he was a Lambda Literary Foundation Emerging Writers Fellow. His work has appeared in Plowshares, Slate, The Advocate, Salon, Local Knowledge, The Rumpus, and The Sun. Ryan has been awarded artist residencies from the McDowell Colony, Yaddo, and Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. In addition to writing, Ryan is the program manager for Connect Host Home program for Avenues for Youth, where community members share their homes and resources with LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. He lives in Minneapolis. And before I have him on stage, I always like to say a little bit about what I love about the work. What I love about this book is not only is Ryan a craftsman as a writer, his eye for detail, his ability to fill out and develop characters that we care about, to create tension in scenes, all the things that as a writing teacher I love and love to teach. But also it's a book written with compassion. And if you've read it, if you haven't, you must. If you've read it, you know that you can't help but care about the people in his book, including Ryan, as we read about him trying to walk that fine line between his job and his personhood, himself as a person. And in short, I think the book does what the best art can do, and that is to make us feel more human and to love and accept our humanity. Kelly Meyer, who's English faculty here, said in an email just today, "I finished the book in just 2 sittings, which is highest praise for a full-time working mom with a young child." It's compelling, it's compassionate, and it's beautifully written. Please welcome Ryan Berg.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for having me, Bill. Thanks for inviting me. That was a really wonderful introduction. Can you come with me everywhere? Do I look like a motivational speaker with this thing on? I've never worn one of these before, so bear with me. It has a little clip, okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to your community, and I think, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's going to stay right here. The dinner was amazing. It was a great opportunity to meet folks within this community and seeing that there's some really amazing community organizing happening and support. And I think with the subject of LGBT youth, one thing that's lacking across the country is necessary and affirming supports for young folks. The stories in this book take place in New York City, but these are universal stories. These are stories that can happen in urban areas and happen in urban areas. And I think that's really important when you're listening tonight to recognize that these situations can happen anywhere. Can you all hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with this thing. So I thought tonight what I would do is I'll read a little bit of the preface, give you some context around LGBT youth homelessness in this country, and then I'll read a brief excerpt, a chapter. So it's a personal narrative, it's a memoir, but it's really portraits of young people that I've worked with and their struggles and their resiliency. And then I'll talk a bit about what can be done within communities to ensure that young LGBT folks who are in foster care don't end up homeless, and those who are homeless receive the supports that they deserve and that they need. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the work that I do in Minneapolis, because it all really combines. So I work for Avenues for Homeless Youth. I work for the Connect Host Home program, which is a community-based response. So the work I was doing in foster care is systems-based work. You'll hear some of the challenges in that work, and then I'll talk about what communities can do to provide supports and affirming spaces for young folks. So let's dig in, all right? There are more than 400,000 youth in the American foster care system today, roughly the same number as the population of Sacramento, California. Foster care, created to protect the welfare of children, is a broken system, hobbled by an outdated bureaucracy, underfunded agencies, and overburdened workers that frequently produces dire outcomes. Research shows that children placed in foster care are more likely than veterans of war to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. In some states, youth are just as likely to be abused in foster care as they are from the homes from which they were removed. Foster care has also become a gateway into homelessness. Nearly half the youth experiencing homelessness today have had at least one placement in a foster home or a group home. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning LGBTQ youth in particular face significant prejudice and discrimination in foster care. Many queer-identified young people who are disproportionately represented in the system report intolerance, physical and emotional mistreatment, and neglect by caregivers and their peers. LGBTQ youth are more likely than their heterosexual counterparts to be placed in group homes. An overwhelming majority of those youth in group homes have been victims of violence. The Open Doors Project, which is a project that provides tools and resources for legal aid and child welfare communities, highlights the following statistics. 70% of LGBTQ youth in group homes reported violence based on LGBTQ status. 100% reported verbal harassment, and 78% of these youth were removed or ran away from their placement due to hostility toward their status as queer or trans. These pervasive negative experiences have had significant impact on the mental and emotional growth of these young folks. Until recent years, child welfare agencies neglected to provide accurate policy, best practices training for workers and for foster parents serving LGBT youth. Without cultural competency training around LGBTQ issues, the result has been re-traumatization, continued abuse, and prolonged rejection for many young people. In early 2004, I began working as a residential counselor and subsequently as a caseworker, working with LGBTQ youth in a foster care program in New York City. The program is made up of two group homes, what I call the 401, located in Queens, and Keep Street in Brooklyn. For me, doing this work was a way to re-engage with the world, to give something back. I started as a residential counselor, an entry-level position requiring a high school diploma and a clean record. The job responsibilities included providing on-site direct care to the young people in the group home, prompting them to do chores like cooking and cleaning, helping them manage conflicts, and engaging them in healthy activities. As a caseworker, I was tasked with goal setting, coordinating services, and monitoring the progress of the youth within the program. The aim of foster care is to reunify young people with their family or provide the tools to live independently. I found myself wholly unprepared for the myriad of personal and social issues I would be forced to confront. Thrown headfirst into the work, I found my understanding of racial and economic justice, gender identity, crime, and poverty challenged at every turn. Facing the realities of these young people daily deepened my understanding of privilege, social responsibility, and ultimately altered my understanding of myself. While doing this work, I learned the statistics. The data point to a litany of troubling risk behaviors. Queer and trans youth are more likely to use and abuse substances. They experience sexual abuse, violence, and clinical depression at greater rates than the general population. Research indicates that LGBTQ youth are more than 3 times as likely to attempt suicide as their straight peers. Risk-taking is typical in adolescence. Couple that with the isolation and rejection that many LGBTQ youth face, and self-destruction becomes the modus operandi. Leaning on unhealthy ways to cope with trauma can become habitual, and youth with self-destructive tendencies are more likely to become adults with self-destructive addictions. In trying to show the youth alternatives to sex work, attempting to break their cycles of drug and alcohol use, and help them build their self-esteem, I was reminded of my own litany of risk behaviors as a young man grappling with my identity, and how I had the tendency to seek out drugs, alcohol, and sex to mask the pain felt from microaggressions and internalized homophobia. While the LGBT movement has made incredible strides in recent years, the neglect of LGBTQ youth issues is astounding. When 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ, but make up only 8% of the population, it's clear that our greatest struggles as a queer community do not all revolve around marriage. Audre Lorde taught us that there is no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not live single-issue lives. Queer and trans youth struggles are intrinsically tied to healthcare, housing, public safety, prison, immigration, employment, poverty, and homelessness. On any given night, there are 2 million homeless youth on the streets of the United States, and there are less than 20,000 beds for those youth. The scarce funds and resources available to provide those beds are in jeopardy because of budget cuts and political pandering. On a whole, the mainstream LGBT movement does a poor job of addressing the needs of the most visible queer and trans youth, white, middle class, and often completely ignores the least visible, youth of color, poor, or gender nonconforming youth. The stories in this book are my effort to allow readers a glimpse into an often unseen world, to evoke change in the lives of youth left without a home because of systemic failures, abuse, neglect, or intolerance for their sexual orientation or gender identity. Facing the realities of these young people forced me to recognize how our systems fail our most vulnerable, and how much more needs to be done to provide support. The challenges I witnessed these young people confront would send most adults into a mental collapse, yet they soldiered on, imbued with the belief that a better life was out there, no matter how bleak their past had been. So now I'm going to introduce you to Barbara, who I worked with as a case manager. The only thing you really need to know is I mentioned Jessica, that's my boss. Prior to this scene, I met her biological father and stepmother for a home visit, and it didn't go well. And the father gave me a picture of Barbara and her brother with their father, and I have it pinned up in my office when Barbara comes in to see me. I'm surprised when Barbara walks into my office, sits down, and acts like nothing's new. She's been AWOL from the group home for a month now. I think she's living with her girlfriend's family, but there's no way to be sure. Things were going well until her father and stepmother showed up at court for her permanency planning hearing, where the judge must determine the appropriateness of the agency's long-term plan for the youth and the reasonableness of the agency's efforts to execute that plan. Before entering the courtroom, they cornered Barbara, berated her, and disowned her for acting like a boy. If she put on a dress, he'd consider supporting her, her father said, but as she is, she's an abomination. I tried to separate them, to shield Barbara from his words, but by the time we were ushered in to see the judge, she was trembling. I was there to tell the court that Barbara had improved since coming into the program. She was placed with the agency after her stepmother filed a person in need of supervision PINS petition, a request for the court to intervene when a child becomes out of control. Barbara's stepmother said that she was wild and disrespectful. She'd leave the house for days at a time and was truant from school. The stepmother alleged physical threats and drug abuse. Barbara claims her stepmother just wanted her out of their lives. She says her father was given an ultimatum, and he chose his wife. When Barbara came into our care in mid-2004, she began attending school regularly for the first time in nearly 2 years. Her teacher said that she was smart and she participated in class. She hadn't run away from the group home or stayed out past curfew like she did while living with her father. She never tried to hide her marijuana use, and the agency was working with her on issues of chemical dependency. On the day of the planning hearing, her father got her so worked up outside of the courtroom that when the judge addressed her, she snapped at him. "You see how she acts, Your Honor?" her father said. Crying, she cursed at him and had to be escorted out. When we left court that day, her placement with the agency was extended for another 6 months. Barbara was silent on the train ride home and studied the advertisements for facial citrus peels to avoid conversation. Her face didn't betray any emotion. I told her to forget what her father had said. She was making strides and needed to continue in that direction. The subway car rattled and shook. The lights flickered as we screeched to a halt at her station. "Stay strong," I said. "I'm here for you." She smiled dimly and promised to try hard, then turned to exit the subway car. She went AWOL that night from Keep Street and stopped attending school. She calls occasionally to tell me she's okay, but never discloses her location. I hadn't seen her since that day in court, nearly a month ago. Barbara absently punches the keyboard of my computer with one finger. Pinned up on the wall behind her, along with a list of caseworker telephone extensions and GED test locations, is the large photograph of Barbara standing with her father and brother at the zoo. In the picture, there's a youthful innocence about her. That joy, that free expression on her face is missing from the person I know. Barbara pulls her camouflage Yankees cap down on her face. She looks frail, like she stopped eating. The sports jersey she wears hangs from her slight frame. She swims in her jeans. Her dark skin is ashen, and her eyes look heavy and somber. I don't know how long I'll have her here, so I pull out my wallet, drop a 20 in her hand, and tell her to use it for food. She thanks me, smiles, then her eyes fall to her sneakers. When I ask how she's doing, she becomes motionless, seems to be holding her breath. She has a sweet disposition. Normally she's good-natured, but out of nowhere she can erupt, lashing out at the tiniest transgression. That's a side we didn't see much. Typically, when still at the group home, she would be found watching BET with the other residents, her bright smile exposing a line of perfect white teeth. When Barbara arrived at Keep Street, the staff loved her right away. Gladys gushed about her acclimating to the home. She made her bed in the morning and left for school right on time. This child does her chores and don't need to be told twice about curfew. How on earth did you get us this one? Gladys said with a sharp laugh. The honeymoon period ended when Barbara flew into a rage at Dia, another resident, whom she accused of stealing her Nike Air Jordans. Gladys said it was impossible to de-escalate Barbara's behavior, that it took 3 counselors to defuse the situation. When Gladys tried to intervene, Barbara bristled and told her to go back to her box of cookies in the office and mind her business. She persisted, and Barbara grabbed a candy bar off the counter, dangled it in front of Gladys like bait, calling her a hippo. She was unfazed by Barbara's outburst. Most of the residents were prone to lashing out. Later, Barbara went to Gladys in her office and apologized, said she didn't know what had happened, didn't know why she was so angry. Barbara is an AG, and aggressive. a label used in the gay urban community for butch lesbians. She binds her breasts, dresses in baggy jeans and sports jerseys. Her hair is set in tight cornrows. On the street, she's always assumed to be a boy. She has a tough, callous veneer. She hides her hurt, or at least she used to. I can't do it no more, yo, she says with an exhale and begins to tremble. She makes her hands into fists and then opens them, the 20 dropping to her feet. I can't do it. Her eyes roll towards the ceiling and her body tenses. She flinches so fully that I think for a moment she's having a seizure. Then tears begin to fall. I got nobody, she says. I wish my office had a door to shut to give us some privacy. Come back to the house, I say, and roll my chair closer, leaning in. We can make this work. Her face becomes taut until she releases into sobs. Her shoulders heave. She no longer hears me. She's alone, deep inside someplace within herself. Why you leave? Leave? I say. Barbara, She lets out a wail that shakes me. Grandma, she calls out. Her head bows. She wipes her wet nose with the ball of her hand. She's the only one who really loved me. I place my hand on her shoulder and feel how her body trembles. I search for some tissue to give her, but only find out balled up Kleenex with chewed up bubblegum in the center. I don't have any words that seem appropriate. I know there's nothing I can do to protect her. I'm helpless to provide even a glimmer of hope. Come back, is all I can say, and we both know that's not enough. I pick the 20 off the floor and push it back into Barbara's hand. Her cheeks are wet. Her breathing stutters. I try to strategize the way a caseworker should. Barbara's safety is paramount and she needs immediate housing, but she refuses to return to the group home, saying that it's too chaotic, that she can't put up with the other residents lying and stealing. I could initiate an emergency respite placement at a different group home outside the LGBTQ program, but I know Barbara won't go. She's stubborn, willing to consider only one option. She wants to be transferred to our apartment program, where residents pair up with one roommate. I've told her time and time again that program is designed for youth who have shown potential for living independently. The rules are clear. All residents considered for the apartment program have to be functioning well in the group home, do their chores regularly, and follow regulations. They must demonstrate good relationships with other residents, attend school on a regular basis, have a part-time job. Barbara currently fails to meet any of the criteria. I plead with her again to return to Keep Street. I'll call her school and see if they'll take her back. Between classes and a part-time job, she'll rarely have to see the other residents, limiting any chance of any conflict that may arise. She could be eligible for the apartment program within a few months. Then who's going to watch my stuff when I'm gone? The staff? Her face sours. The minute I leave the house, you know they're going to jack all my shit. I know she's right. Even though all the residents have their own cabinets with padlocks to store their belongings, the moment one is left unattended, it's broken into. The locks are pried open, the wooden slats of the cabinets are split, and the residents' sneakers, shirts, and caps are swiped and sold on the street. Stealing has become an epidemic in the house. Each time a resident begins to accumulate a wardrobe, the necessary accoutrements of adolescence, everything is stolen. The program is allotted $800 annually per resident for clothing. There's no reimbursement for stolen items. When it's gone, it's gone. The residents who steal from the others have made it big business. The main reason Barbara won't return to Keep Street is because of her old roommate, Maddie. Maddie had devised a scheme that when the residential staff were downstairs preparing for dinner, and the other residents were at night school or work, she'd sneak up to the bedrooms, unlocking the doors with a key that she had swiped from a staff member, and sift through everyone's closet, leaving the house with the most expensive items before anyone could suspect her. It wasn't until Maddie was found tossing garbage bags stuffed full of her roommate's belongings out of the third-story window down to a friend on the street that any staff had any idea that she was stealing. I promised Barbara that I'll withhold Maddie's clothing money and that she'll get a portion of the money to make up for the stolen items. No, Barbara says. No way I'm going back there. When I ask if she can stay with her brother, she shakes her head. He's just turned 18 and can't take on the responsibility of his younger sister. I don't even suggest her father as an option. After the court date, he was impossible to talk with. He continued the name-calling, the blaming. When I tried to follow up after our meeting, I was met with icy derision. Barbara was my problem, I was told. They were done with her. Even youth who function well in foster care are likely to flounder once they're out on their own. One study suggests that nearly half of the youth experiencing homelessness have gone through the foster care system at one time or another, and 40% of homeless youth identify as queer or trans. After aging out of the system, over half of the youth remain unemployed. Debilitating depression, anxiety, and addiction affects 1/3 of this population. Unless there's a visiting resource, an adult who can function as a role model and a stable, caring presence in their lives, there's little hope of a life outside of the system or off the streets. What about Rochelle? I ask. Barbara's been living with her girlfriend's family off and on since leaving Keep Street. Rochelle is 2 years older than Barbara and 7 months pregnant. According to Jessica, my boss, the family's house is on the verge of collapse. Rochelle's mother has 10 children, all of whom still live with her. She collects Social Security checks, and some of the older children are selling drugs. Other than that, there's no income for the family. When Barbara's there, she's just another mouth to feed, which causes tension between Rochelle and her brothers. Barbara wants to get a job and help buy groceries, but because she's only 16 and isn't attending school, she doesn't have her working papers. No one will hire her for any legal work. She told me on the phone around the time that she went AWOL that all she wanted to do was help raise Rochelle's baby with her, to help give that baby a happy life. Rochelle told me her brothers don't want me there no more, she tells me now, and fuck her anyway. I can tell by Barbara's leaden, lifeless eyes that she's had enough. She's tired of searching for places to stay, of fighting with Rochelle and her brothers. I'm afraid she'll have to resort to survival sex or drug running in order to feed herself. I pull out a piece of paper and tell her to write down every person she knows. Maybe there's a family member she hasn't thought of for a while, some distant relative. She holds the pen just above the surface of the paper, drawing circles in the air. She does this a while longer before dropping the pen to the desk. Ain't nobody, she says, and rises up from her seat. I stand with her and lean against the doorway. I'm not ready for her to leave. I know that when she walks out of my office, she'll have no place to go. I don't think we're done here yet, I say, but she's had enough, and she pushes past me, down the corridor, vanishing into the staircase. For the first time since meeting her, I fear that I'll never see Barbara again. Streetlights seep into my apartment window. The lamp on my nightstand shines from underneath, casting steep shadows against my wall. I pull out a bottle of Hornitos tequila and a pack of Parliament Lights out of a brown paper bag. On my way home from the office, I knew I'd want something to burn the day away. I take a shot just as the phone rings. Too drained to talk to anyone, I just sit. After the fourth ring, my answering machine clicks on. Ryan, it's Gladys. I stand up and walk over to the voice. Somebody stopped by the house and wanted to talk with you. Hi, Ryan. The voice is quiet, childlike. It's Barbara. I lean down and turn up the volume. I just wanted to say thanks for today. I wanted to tell you I thought of somebody. I got a cousin down south, and I want to try and live with her. When I hear the receiver hang up, I move back to my bed and sit down. The silence of my empty room rings in my ears. I reach for the bottle and think of Barbara's prospects. I take a swig of tequila, and it goes down like warm ribbons of amber. Thinking of Barbara's future, I want to feel something like relief, but can't. So I like to let you know that Barbara's doing well. I know that's a really dark story, and it doesn't leave on an optimistic note, but Barbara found what I think is essential for moving into stability for young folks, for anyone, and that's connection. That's community. That's a caring, consistent adult in her life. She did not move down with her aunt in the South. She ended up, after another couple years of great struggle, finding a life partner and moving upstate New York. And they created a life together, and they have a child, and she has a job, and she has the life she wants, that she always wanted. And so after reading that piece, I always like to let folks know that there's a brighter side But unfortunately, with the young people that I work with, the brighter side is not always the reality. Out of the young people that I worked with in New York, 4 of them have already passed away. None of them seeing 30 years old. Another one who I just saw in Seattle, I was in Seattle for a book event 2 weeks ago, and she moved out to Seattle to become a school teacher as a child, and she was just diagnosed with ALS, which is a terminal disease. So with the success rates, there's always the reality of a lot of young people who do fall through the gaps, and that supports and services need to be present for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think needs to happen within our communities to provide supports for young folks. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the work I'm doing in the Twin Cities. And then we'll have time to talk, and hopefully you have questions for me. What would it take to build on the small successes workers make with LGBTQ youth? The system would need to look through a different lens and acknowledge the interconnectedness of systemic racism, homophobia, transphobia, and poverty. LGBTQ foster kids need access to services that affirm their identities. Service providers need to be trained to see youth from a trauma-informed perspective. And that means a treatment framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all kinds of trauma, rather than doling out oppositional defiant diagnoses to anyone who is argumentative or unruly. To help young people in care build their coping mechanisms, we not only have to treat symptoms, but we also need to help them heal from the underlying cause of their behavior. Instead of shipping young people from placement to placement, we have to allow them to build attachments with caring, consistent adults. Maybe then they'll have an opportunity for greater success, inching towards reducing harm in their lives instead of battling the dehumanizing ways in which the system treats them for being different. All youth deserve safe and affirming spaces to live, yet queer affirming foster homes can be challenging to find. This is not for lack of trying. There are more than 2 million LGBTQ adults in the United States willing to foster or adopt, yet 60% of foster care agencies report never having placed a youth with LGBTQ couples, and 40% of those agencies said they would not even accept applications from LGBTQ individuals or couples. What can be done to ensure that LGBTQ youth transition out of foster care and don't end up homeless? We need to deepen the understanding and conversation about homelessness and take action. Family rejection is part of that narrative of LGBT youth homelessness. A lot of ignorance and injustice needs to be uncovered and put right. But we can't limit our discussion to easily digestible sound bites. Simplifying the story to narrowly focus on rejection demonizes families and repairs little. Parents may need in-house guidance early on when they're struggling with a youth's identity. We can keep young people in their homes by providing preventative services and education to the parents. In addition to the family rejection narrative, we have to discuss institutional failures. Youth homelessness, in part, is the end product of a failure of many systems. We have to acknowledge how racial disparity, with its collateral consequences, intersects with other predictors of homelessness. We have to build a social awareness so that folks who benefit from the system begin to realize that that very system is oppressive and threatening to others. More beds and shelters is a temporary solution. It's a Band-Aid to a gushing wound. More needs to be done in ways of prevention so young people won't need those beds to begin with. But in order for that to happen, we have to fully acknowledge how our systems fail LGBT youth and how institutionalized oppression makes it incredibly difficult for young people to find affordable, stable housing and get a job with a livable wage so they have an equal shot at the future that they deserve. Thank you. I'm going to, I'm going to talk a bit about the work I'm doing now in the Twin Cities because I think it's really relevant to the reading in the book. So I work for Avenues for Homeless Youth, what's that? Yeah, I'm going to use that in just a second. Yep. So I work for Avenues for Homeless Youth, and I work for a host home program. And host home is a community-based response to homelessness. So I was talking in the book about systems work, right? How within systems work, a lot of youth fall through the cracks. It's a prescriptive approach to working with young people, and it doesn't work for everyone. It didn't work for Barbara, right? She needed more personalized approach. She needed to build connection with young folks. And so what Host Home does is it's the community saying, we recognize that there's a need and we're going to do something about it. In the state of Minnesota, we have 6,000 young people experiencing homelessness on any given night. Anyone want to hazard a guess at how many beds we have for those young people? 500. The vast majority of our young people are fending for themselves. So obviously systems, though necessary, can't fill the gap. So we as community members need to fill the gap. So what is Host Home? It's folks who open up their homes and provide food and shelter, and then we provide case management and support. How does that differ from foster care? It differs in a great way. First of all of them are queer, trans, or allied, right? So the cultural competency piece is there. Young people are going to be moving into homes where they feel supported and they feel like their identity is acknowledged and honored, which is incredibly important. Secondly, no one is placed. This is a matching process and it's youth determined. So youth get to read the applications of the hosts. Hosts don't read the applications of the youth. That may sound like a minor detail to y'all, but it gives that young person agency in their own lives. They become an active participant in their own lives, which is the opposite of foster care. Youth coming out of foster care, like I mentioned in the book, half of homeless youth have had foster care experience in their lives. Two major complaints. One, I had no say in where I got to stay. And two, people were paid to care for me. So this is a volunteer program. Hosts open up their home, provide food and shelter, and they're volunteers. And the youth get to determine who they want to meet. So they get to read that application, and they can kind of thumb through, and there's an open letter that each host has to write to a young person. And they can read that letter, and it may say, I have 10 cats. And the youth can say, I don't want to live with 10 cats. Let me go somewhere else. So they get to choose and kind of determine who they'd like to meet, which is to be an active participant in your own lives is no minor thing if you've been coming through the system. And then we provide ongoing supports. We train the hosts. There's 16 hours of training that we go through with those hosts, and then we have ongoing trainings for them as well. And this is a program that's been going on in the Twin Cities for 20 years. The first one was called the JLBT Host Home Program. Average stay is about a year for those young people. And then the program I run is called Connect, and that's a short-term host home program, 1 week to 3 months. We have folks from all over the country asking to replicate this program. And we readily share all of our information. So we've shared information just in this state with Duluth, La Crosse, which is not in the state, but very close, and some other folks across the Minnesota area. I think there's one in Mankato, and then there's one in Rochester as well. I was just out in Seattle talking about it with folks. So it's a system that people recognize that could work. We have 80% success rate of young people moving into stability. And why is that? They're allowed to make connections with caring, consistent adults in their lives. And those relationships can go on past the time that they're living there. So it can be a real kind of mentoring experience, which I think is huge. It makes a difference. So I'm going to show just a little video of Host Home. And then I would like to open it up if you guys have questions about the book, the work that I do, whatever. My favorite color, I don't care.
I moved to St. Paul, Minnesota to be with my mom. And unfortunately, she was not handling things financially as well as she believed herself to be. And she was evicted. And when this happened, I was under 18 years of age. I was still 17. And I had just moved from another state. I didn't have any local identification or connections.
I stayed in my first shelter when I was 16. But once I turned 18, the options are a little bit less. So I stayed with friends, or sometimes in my mom's car, or in an emergency bed, or wherever I could find to go.
Youth are looking for folks who are like them. They are looking for folks who have experienced similar hardships to them and who have made it. or who are pushing through and making it, who are living full lives, who are going to work, who are having families, who are having fun and being connected to the community. And it's hard to feel like you can do that if you don't see other people in the community who are like you doing that.
It's really a community-based response to youth homelessness. So we look at the community and the young people in our communities and what they're saying they want. And we try to connect those of us who have more resources with those of us who have less resources. A very, very simple concept.
I was able to visit with them at their home, to see the home first. They gave me a tour. I was able to go to lunch with them and have a conversation with them and get a feel for them before I was expected to just move in with these strangers. And you feel more like a person involved in your own life than a peg looking to be put into a slot.
At some point it became so clear that we are this stable couple and we love each other and that we have space in our home, and why wouldn't we? So it became how could we not instead of how could we.
We had resources that we could share and
space,
which is, what they need. So,
yeah.
The goal of the GLBT Host Home program is that for this amount of time, a young person didn't have to worry about food and shelter. So that's the beautiful thing about the GLBT Host Home program. That's the goal. What happens during that time, that's the icing on the cake.
I want to go to school. I want to get a job. I want to open a bank account. Then we sit down and we're like, okay, I asked them, I said, okay, so you want these 3 things. How do you want to get them? Like, what are the steps that we need to take to get those things? And we start developing those kind of skills around, like, specifics on what is it that I need to do in order to get what it is that I want.
I feel like the program and the way Rocky speaks about the program, it is an act of solidarity.
yeah.
It's saying this is a problem in our community and we need to act to solve it.
To see them like living like out and open and like being comfortable and okay with that, that was definitely a positive thing for me.
Because we're community-based, we're very much a part of the community. This program wouldn't exist without community involvement. So community buy-in to Host Home is essential. And I think, when we think about transformation, Host Home is not only transformational for the young people and hosts, but also community by extension. So it's about communities recognizing that there's a need and standing up and doing something about it. So working together with community to make that happen.
The majority of homeless youth in this country, queer or not, are youth of color. So race and racism, white supremacy, white privilege are at the heart of their homelessness.
I went from that to not only being on firm footing, but being in a village, feeling like I was in a village of supportive, involved people who I could actually be involved with and support as well.
Turn this back on. So that's the work I do in the Twin Cities with Host Home. So now I would like to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions about either the work I'm doing in Host Home or the book, the writing of the book, whatever you. I'm an open book. So please ask questions. Yes.
I started to ask you a question you never got to answer about training. You had talked about how in the foster homes the staff can be very insensitive at best and horrible at worst. But so what trainings are in place in foster homes specifically, but then in your program as well to make people more sensitive to these issues? There's a myriad of issues going on there.
That's a great question. So there's no federal mandate that would require cultural competency training around LGBTQ issues for workers or for foster parents. It's left up to the states. and it's left up to agencies within those states to determine. So most, in the Twin Cities at least, most of the agencies will have a cultural competency training that workers can opt to take or not. And foster parents are not required. And I've talked a lot about this with folks who are still doing systems work, and it boils down to the fact that there's a scarcity of foster parents as it is, and the majority of foster parents are coming from faith-based organizations, and the fear is that agencies are afraid that foster parents' faith and LGBT issues may not align, or the values may not align, and so they don't want to chance it by losing those foster parents. They don't want them to walk away if they say that this training is mandated. So it's a fear of losing foster parents, which is obviously a catch-22, right? Because if you put a young person into a foster home that's not affirming, young person doesn't know that, they're feeling safe for the first time in a long time, they're grappling with identity, they begin to vocalize who they are, that foster parent can say, well, you got to go back.
Well, you might lose the foster home because you know what I mean? Because the foster parents might be like, oh my gosh, we're going to start getting kids like this. I don't want to do this anymore. Well, they could have just been educated to begin with.
Right, and transparent. And so what that does to a lot of young people is they get bounced from foster home to foster home, group home to group home, residential treatment center to residential treatment center, and they begin to build attachment disorders. And so that trust with a care and consistent adult takes a lot longer because adults have failed them time again.
So your program has 16 hours of training plus ongoing training.
Right.
What does that entail?
So we do an overall of what are the predictors of youth homelessness. We do a trauma and resiliency training, conflict resolution training. We do gender 101 and sexual orientation training. We turn the lens inward. We ask, what are your motives? Like, why are you wanting to do this? What are the unwritten rules of your home? What is a youth going to see when you're triggered? And how are they going to know that you're going to be able to narrate your emotion instead of acting out on it? Right? So we provide those tools. We also recognize that we live in a state with some of the worst racial disparities in the country, and the vast majority of young people experiencing homelessness are youth of color. Vast majority of folks who can host are white. So there is that skewed power dynamic. So we do power and privilege training and anti-racism training as well. And then we bring in folks who've been in the program, both hosts and youth, to talk about their experience for incoming hosts. And then the first Saturday of every month is we call it Host Home Network, but it's a support group, but people don't like to go to support groups, so we call it a network. And that's a place for hosts to talk and talk about the challenges and difficulties. But then every third one of those is a new training as well, so we keep that training refreshed. My job as the program manager is to be the direct support for the hosts, and then the case manager is the direct support for the youth. And you want this?
Yeah, earlier on you said that, I think it was just Minnesota, there was 500 available homes for children, and it was like 6,000?
Yep.
Now, is that including the host home programs, or is that just the traditional...
Shelters?
Yes.
Yeah, so that includes host homes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's shelter, and then there's something called transitional living programs, which are a little longer than shelters. It's including both of those.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Now, is the host home program strictly for LGBTQ
That's a good
children,
question.
or?
That's a good question. So at Avenues, we have 4 host home programs. The first one that was originated in 1997 is the GLBT program. And that was a community-based response, right? The community said, we recognize there's this need, we're gonna do something about it. 2011, suburban Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is at, recognized that there were no suburban supports for young folks experiencing homelessness. They'd had to migrate into the city in order to receive services, which meant that they were more vulnerable to exploitation. They had to navigate streets that weren't familiar to them. Within 48 hours of a young person being on the streets, they're going to be approached by someone who wants to exploit them in some way. So the suburbs are recognizing that this was a problem in their own community. They recognized that the host home program could potentially work in their community. They came to Avenues and said, can we partner and do this together? So in 2011, the suburban host home program started. The year after that, the Minneapolis program started. So we do have general population host home programs. And across the country, there are general population programs. It just happened to be that in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, it started as an LGBT program. Yeah. You had a question?
In this program, how many youth are currently waiting for homes?
That's a really good question too. So we're small by design. We're non-institutional. We don't receive government funding, and that's for a reason. We want to keep it small and be able to have those relationships with young people, which we know makes a difference. So our programs are designed to work with 10 young people at a time, right? So 10 hosts matched with 10 young people. In order to do that, we need to have 20 hosts, 10 that will be actively hosting, and 10 will be on hold. So when the host that's actively hosting is kind of done with their time that year, we give them a break, go live your life, go on vacation. And then we actively would work with those hosts that have been on hold. But we're small by design for a reason, and that's really to have that engagement piece, so we can respond to youth's and host needs in the moment. When it becomes too large, then it becomes institutional and feel to the young people, and then they don't have that access to relate to just my program's 2 people, case manager and myself. That's it. So the youth know us well, right?
Yeah.
While I was talking to y'all, I had a youth buzzing me. So, they know they have access to me directly, whereas if it was a system, they'd have to go through like a chain, and there'd be a bureaucracy. So it's an intentional design. Yep.
Is it designed to stay small, or however your kids keep coming in that you need it, would you accept them, or would you branch off into another center itself?
That's a really good question too. We're small by design, and we're going to keep it at 10 for each program, but we just added the Connect Host Home program, which is queer and trans specific, recognizing that emergency shelter is an issue as well, and that there are needs for kind of a more direct and immediate approach to addressing youth homelessness. Transitional living programs, which is the GLBT program, there's a real long intentional matching process, a referral process. It's about a month to 2 months long. So it wouldn't be emergency shelter. And so Connect fills that gap. So a young person can come in and be housed within the same night that they make that referral. But other programs are growing around. And our case managers also work with about 20 youth outside of the program, so in the community. It's called outreach. And so they're doing that as well. So providing resources and support to young people, even though it's not in the host home program. Yes?
So one of the things you said is that ideally we would prevent homelessness of this community from happening to begin with, and that starts with educating parents. This will be an odd question coming from the person that's representing PFLAG, but what can be done? I can sit at a table and I can hand out resources to people, certainly, but how do we get this information out to parents? I would love for a parent somewhere to call me and then go sit in their living room and say, what is your issue with your son or daughter, and talk to me and I will help you through this. How can we, as a community, as a culture, make that, I don't know what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, well, that's why I wrote the book. Yeah. That's why this book exists. Because there needed to be more outreach tools. I needed to do something that would build empathy in order to evoke change, right? My work in the community is I think, transformational, but how do we reach larger groups? And building empathy is key to evoking change. So telling stories are transformational. Right. And I think that's the place where folks start to see that these young people are human. Mm-hmm. Everyone deserves a safe, affirming space to live, regardless of how you identify, and regardless of what your own personal beliefs may be. Mm-hmm. Everyone deserves a safe place to live. And so I think that's the starting point, and it's slow, right? I think we are eager to have all these changes take place. If we're diligent, consistent, and tenacious about it, that change will happen. If we come to the work with open hearts, I think that is essential as well. I think there's so much of sides demonizing each other. And I think finding a place where we can just share space and come with our true selves. And that may sound corny to folks, but I think we get in each other's way. We get in our own way sometimes when we're up against folks who may have differing points of view. Yeah.
As a parent, it's
Yeah, it's tough. There's an urgency to it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
funded? Is it grant, donation?
That's a good question. Donations. No, so it's partially through the United Way. They have a splinter program in the Twin Cities called the Arise Project, which is a queer and trans specific program. And they do a lot of our funding, and then we do a lot of fundraising, and we have some rich gays in the cities who like to give us their money, which is nice. We'll take it. Yes.
The birth of the book. Did it start back when you were working? Did you say, "Oh, got a brainchild here," or tell us about that?
Yeah. So I moved to New York to be in the theater, and I did that for quite a while. And the reason I went into theater was really because I feel like stories are transformational, and I felt that within that world, it was just too cloistered and siloed, and it was too much about commerce. And so I did some searching, and I found on Craigslist this job offering, and I went for it. Totally underqualified and had no experience, and I'm like, oh, I'm gay, they're gay, we'll have so much in common. And it was very naive going into the work. But once I got into the work and got to know the young people and recognized that the challenges that were before them, I couldn't turn away from it. And I've always been a writer, but I intentionally did not want to write about the young people because I didn't want to exploit stories. And I wanted to be really cognizant of the fact that I'm coming from a place of privilege. I'm a white man, cisgender, who comes from, I'm from the Midwest. I had plenty of privilege in front of me, and so I really needed to interrogate my motives around why I should write this book and what was the purpose of the book if I were to write it. So I ended up, while doing the work, going to a writer's workshop for social workers at the University of Iowa. And that was the genesis of the book. And I was talking to a social work professor there, and she said, you have something here, and I think you should go with it. And so I wrote, for those of you who've read the book, I wrote Lady Fingers, which is the introduction of the book, first. That was the first thing that came out. And I decided to apply to grad school, so I went to get an MFA in creative writing, and I wrote my thesis as part of this, and then it just kind of grew into the book. But it became necessary for me to kind of distinguish between, am I trying to write just a piece of literature, or am I trying to evoke some change and use this as an outreach tool to make change in young people's lives? And that, the latter was the most important to me, that it was about how can we build awareness within our communities, because most people don't recognize that these young people exist. They're invisible. And so how do we build awareness? How do we build empathy? And then how do we really shift that power dynamic and come from a perspective of not charity, but solidarity. And that's kind of where the book came from. Yes?
Talk about the invisibility of the youth.
Yeah.
I want to hear that Christina had
No one knows, honestly. And so I went back, when the book came out, I did a book launch in New York, and two of the youth that are in the book came up and read with me. And they didn't read stories I wrote about them, they read their own stories. And I asked about Christina, and no one had heard a thing, and Christina disappeared in 2005, early 2006. Oddly, though, they said that in New York, the TV newscast, like missing person, she showed up like 8 years later on that. So I don't know if it's like a revolving wheel of youth that are shown, but I found that kind of eerie and odd. But Christina did not have a positive outcome from her experience. Anyone else? Yes.
It said in the video that, the program is a year placement, and I'm just wondering what you do during that year for the end goal of, is it similar to the foster program where you're looking for adoption, or what's kind of the motivation after that year?
So the youth that we work with are 16 to 24. So they're not looking to be adopted. So really it's about finding stable housing, right? So, but we don't impose goals on young people. They create their own goals. So traditionally, historically, it's been education, employment, housing. Those are the big goals, but then there could be a myriad of smaller goals in there, like I want to get a driver's license, or, I need health insurance.
And is that your program and the host to help them kind of work on those goals?
Yeah, that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it's really it's the case manager who's kind of tasked with those responsibilities, but oftentimes hosts want to play a role, and it's up to the young person to determine if that host can play that role, right? It's about trust, and it's about their determination as a young person and the agency in their own lives, and how much they want a host to participate in that. So hosts can look anything like a roommate situation, or it can look like a mentoring situation. And actually the very first young person in the GLBT hosting program ended up being adopted by their hosts. Now that's not a goal, and that's not something that we would set out to do, but that was the kind of organic relationship that took place between that host and that youth. Yeah. Anyone else?
So names changed to protect the innocent?
Most definitely, yeah. So that was a huge.
I didn't know how much conversation you had.
Well, all the youth that I could find knew that I was writing the book. I found about half of them. But yeah, so names were changed, defining characteristics were changed. And so that was another struggle when I was thinking about writing the book, was how do I honor their privacy and the confidentiality that's in my working with them, but also tell these stories truthfully and with integrity. So everyone that I know who's read the book, that's in the book, liked it and thought it represented the experience. One young person said their only complaint was they thought they needed more screen time. I said we can work on another project together.
What did some of your former coworkers thought about the book?
That's a good question too. So Gina, who was the woman who hired me, loves the book. My previous supervisor was supportive of the book. And I've talked to two of the other youth workers that were residential counselors in the home who've liked the book. There are some folks I haven't talked to. I imagine some people have maybe take issue with certain aspects of it, but it's never been addressed to me personally. But I was very cognizant of respecting everyone's privacy and not just the young people. So everyone who's in the book I'm the only one whose name hasn't been changed and whose identifying characteristics hasn't been changed. Anyone else? Yeah?
Do you have any advice for new nonfiction writers?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. That's a broad question. No, it's fine. What kind of nonfiction?
I guess I was just asking because I know I have students here. I'm one of the English faculty. I'm the one that read your book in Tuesday.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
Yeah, I just wanted to open it up to see if you have any kind of advice along the vein of writing generally.
It took me nearly 10 years to write this book. I rewrote this book, I can't even tell you how many times. Right before I sent it out to publishers, I cut out 140 pages and had to rewrite the whole book. Revise. Revision is writing, as far as I'm concerned. If you're, when I was young and I was aspiring to write, I was thinking about publishing, I wasn't thinking about the craft of writing, right? And then it got to the point in my life where I was in my mid-30s when I got serious about writing, when I really kind of made it the priority. And I think writing on a regular basis, being consistent, I write every day. And even if it's 15 minutes, I write every day. And I think being gentle with yourself, I was a little too rough with myself too judgmental, right? Because everyone's rough drafts suck, right? Mine in particular were horrific. And so I would get discouraged and I just wanted to throw the whole project out because I couldn't get to the marrow of what I wanted to say. And it took me a long time. Half the time I didn't know what the chapter was about until I was halfway through and maybe in the fourth draft. So patience, being kind to yourself, but being tenacious at the same time. I don't know, does that tooth, right?
Yes, great
Okay.
answer.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
One thing I've encountered a lot in my own life and also in my friends who are part of the LGBTQ community with me is this, when you talked about like youth having their own goals, a lot of times I've experienced people superimposing a particular goal of forgiveness towards people who have harmed us in some way, in particular parents, and the idea that they're your parents and if they're trying to have a relationship with you, you should swallow anything that's ever happened because they're trying now and you should just, kind of start over or whatever and not really work through that or hold them accountable. Do you have any advice for, how to discuss that or how to engage with that kind of goal of forgiveness as the goal?
I mean, that has to be the goal of the young person. If it is the goal of the young person, I would never impose. I'm trying to think about the young people I work with who may have struggled with family. None of that would be imposed on the young person. I would never say you have to make amends with your family, especially if they've been rejected and experienced great trauma from family. Sometimes family of origin doesn't work out. That's a reality, and that's why historically queer folks have created family. Right. I would say to folks who are eager for young people to build those bridges again, it's not on our time frame, right? We can't impose that time frame on a young person. It's up to the young person, and that may, depending on the level of trauma they've experienced, that could take years. So I think patience is going to be key with that, and then recognizing that it isn't our decision as caring people in that young person's life to make that decision for them. We can be caring, we can be consistent, we can be present, we can be transparent, but ultimately it's up to the young person if they want to engage in that. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's not so much a question, just a comment or observation. I think in the book you make you paint a really good picture of being kind of this observer of things that are happening in these kids' life and being very powerless to do much about it. Right. The one thing that stands out in particular is when you go to this like cable TV thing, and there's the creepy guy who's definitely appealing to one of your charges in his desire to be adopted. And I mean, you didn't come out and say anything in the book, but it was obviously a very creepy thing. And you're there and you're seeing it happen, and yet.
Yeah. So not to impose on a young person, but to have conversation and be transparent with them about what I. So I did have a conversation with them about what did you think of this person, and the young person obviously there was a mutual attraction there that was unhealthy from my perspective, and I wanted to have a real conversation around that with the young person, and I did. And that speaks to, I think the trauma that young person had experienced and the feeling that the only way that they can show love, right, is through sexual means because of the abuse that they experienced. So having really transparent conversation, and then also getting them linked up with the therapist for our program to work on those issues. I'm not a trained clinician, so I know what my role is pretty limited in that realm. I can be there and be a mentor for a young person and talk through certain issues, but when it starts to get into more of a therapeutic role, then we have to switch over to the therapist.
I could see you wishing you could fill that role as therapist too.
Yeah. What I do for a living, even though I'm not a clinician, is a form of therapy, but I can't say I'm a therapist. And I wouldn't take on that title because I haven't gone through the training of it. But a lot of it is about relationship building, right? I think throughout the book and throughout the work I do now, I'm confronted with a lot of that on a daily basis. And the unfortunate reality is a lot of the young people are going to make decisions that we just don't agree with. In that particular instance, that young person ended up living with that man. I didn't find out about that until, actually, it was my last day in New York City. And I was walking down the street and I ran into that young person in Times Square. And we started talking, and he's like, oh yeah, I had it for like 2 years. And of course, I was cringing, because I know what that relationship was about, and it was incredibly unhealthy, but I'm not there to place that judgment on that young person. Anyone else? Yes?
For the trans youth, what do you do to help them through their transition if they do wish to transition while they're with you?
Whatever they want us to. We do most of the youth. So about 90% of the youth that I work with in the host home program are trans or gender nonconforming. The youth that are trans and are wanting to transition, we help them get linked up with if they need, if they want to meet with a therapist, if they want to do hormone treatment, get them linked up with a doctor who's going to help with that. If it's top surgery, if it's bottom surgery, whatever it is, we help them with that. If it's around name changes, we do that, gender markers, and then have really intentional conversations too around what all of that means. Because I think what a lot of young people don't recognize, just like the logistics. So for example, a young person who had their name changed and the gender marker changed, but then their healthcare identified them as male, right? But they would still need some healthcare services like pap smear, but it would no longer be covered under their health insurance. So these are some of the issues that come up. Our systems are antiquated and not up to speed with the reality of gender in our day and age. So part of my job and the case manager's job is to help youth navigate those systems and find ways for it to work for them so they can live their true authentic self and still get the health care that they need. Does that answer your? Yeah. Anyone else have any questions about the book or the work I do? Well, thank you very much for having me. You've been a fantastic group of folks.